I was in Las Vegas, and I was on my way back to Austin. Okay, and I sat down, and I was waiting to board, and I sat down, and I'm sitting there, and this guy comes over and he sits down next to me, and the guy's wearing a baseball cap, kind of low down to here, and a pair of dark glasses, and he sits down and he pulls out this book, and he puts it like almost right next to his face, and he's sitting there, and I turn to him and I go, you know, they've invented this thing called that helps you read, you know. And he says, what? And he looks at me and said, what? And I said, they invented this new thing that helps you read. And he says, what are you talking about? I said, they're called glasses. Okay, you don't have to have a book right next to your face, you know. So he starts laughing, and I recognize the laugh, but I can't place the laugh, but I recognize it, you know. And so I said, what do you do? And he says, this and that. I said, oh, okay. He says, what do you do? And I said, well, I work for my dad. He said, well, what do y'all do? I said, well, we loan money. He says, oh, okay. He says, you don't sound really excited about it. I said, man, you know, it pays the bills, you know. And he says, well, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? If you could do anything. And I said, well, I'd be in show business. I said, I love to entertain people. I love to be in front of a crowd. I love to, you know, make people laugh. He said, well, why don't you do that? I said, well, because I have a lot of responsibilities, you know. He said, well, what kind of responsibilities? I said, well, I have a wife and I have kids and I have, you know, property and vehicles and businesses. And he said, well, how much do you really want to be in show business? And I said, well, I really want to be in show business. I mean, ever since I was a kid, that's what I've always loved to do. And he said, well, this is what you need to do. He said, what you need to do is you need to stay focused. Okay? You need to focus on what it is you want to do. He said, and I said, well, okay, well, you know, I'm thinking like an American, and I said to him, I said, well, I'm staying focused on making money, you know. And he said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He said, you got to stay focused on what it is you really want to do. Now, what do you really want to do? I said, I want to entertain. I love to be in front of people. This is what you have to do. You have to get rid of all your responsibilities. Okay? How many cars can you drive at a time? Well, first, how many cars do you own? I said 5. So how many can you drive at a time? 1. And that's all you need. How many homes do you own? I said, well, I own 7. He said, well, how many can you live in at a time? 1. And that's all you need to keep is 1. He said, what else is keeping you from being in show business? I said, well, you know, I mean, I have a wife, and get rid of her. He goes, get rid of her.
How many wives can you wait?
If you're a Mormon, it's different.
Right. So he says, well, you know, are you happy in that situation? I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm happy being married, but I'm not happy being married to her, you know. I mean, she's an awesome lady, you know, and I love her to this day, but that's not the person I want to be with, you know. She said, well, this is what you need to do. You need to get rid of all these responsibilities that are just extras, you know, like extra baggage. And you need to focus on what it is you want to do, okay? So I said, okay. So I sat there and I said, you know, I don't know who you are or anything, but I recognize your laugh. And he says, you what? I said, well, I do 150 different voices and accents. And my deal is I can recognize voices before I recognize faces. Now, that sounds weird, but I can recognize your laugh. And I said, but I don't know who you are, but I can recognize it. Or it sounds familiar, you know. And he says, well, that's probably, you're probably right. You probably do recognize my laugh. And I said, well, what do you do for a living? He says, well, I'm in show business. I said, well, what do you do? And he said, and he pulled his glasses off, and he goes, I do comedy. And it was Steve Martin. And 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 he put it back on, and when I realized who he was, I said, "Tell me more about this focus thing. Tell me more about that. What do you mean be focused on what you want?" He said, "Don't go out and buy the new car. Don't go out and buy the new, TV. Don't go out and buy the new this or the new that or the new this." He said, "Stay focused on what it is you want to do. And if you do that, you'll be so good at it." Okay? And I said, "Yeah, but what if there's no money in it?" He said, "Don't worry about that. Don't worry about there not being any money in it." Okay? He said, "Because if you do what it is that makes you happy, you're going to be so good at it that the money will chase you. You won't have to chase the almighty dollar. It will chase you. Because you know what? You're enjoying what you're doing. And the alarm doesn't have to go off. You're going to wake up before the alarm even has to go off. Because you can't wait to get there. So, if you're doing what you love to do, whether it be digging a ditch, changing hearts, somebody, a heart operation, a brain operation, whatever it is you do, if you love what you're doing, the almighty dollar will chase you.